I'm Will LaVeist. He's Eric ClaVille. And you're tuned into LaVeist and ClaVille, the show where we tell it to you straight the way it is from a black male's perspective. So let's get right to this show.
Yeah.
Pass and fail. The inner city public school crisis. Pass and fail. Inner city public school crisis. So recently the organization Project Baltimore, which is an investigative journalism organization, they did a report where they found that hundreds of students are failing in Baltimore City schools. And the story featured a 17-year-old who thought he was graduating in high school and then learned that he actually must start over, after 4 years. The student's mother, name is Tiffany France, says the school failed to inform her and her sons of the son's crisis, and that the school failed her son. So tell me, ClaVille, is it the school that failed her son? What is the deal here? I know you've been waiting to talk about this for a minute now.
Well, look, I'm going to take a different approach on this. And I think even the article that came out in the news regarding Baltimore schools, but I'll say this. Number one, my heart goes out to that young man and all the children who are not getting the education that they deserve and to make it through society. My heart goes out to the parents who believe that their children are performing at the high level or should be performing at the high level, and they're not. Okay, my heart goes out to them. But let me get to the root of the problem. Okay, the root of the problem are our families and the parents of these children. Okay, I said it. And let me quantify that statement before we start to get backlash about this. Teachers are there to teach our children and to help them and to mentor them in a subject and possibly in areas of life.
Right.
It is not the responsibility of teachers to ensure that kids come to school. It is not the responsibility of teachers to ensure that our children are exhibiting and executing the model behavior for learning. It is not the responsibility of the teachers to ensure that our children are prepared when they come into the classroom. That is the 100%, 1,000% responsibility of parents. It is the responsibility of parents to ensure that our children are ready, that they are equipped to learn. Now, let me give you my what we do, and we can get into this going back and forth. But in my house, my family, education is right under our faith in God, Jesus Christ, our family, and then education. Right there. One, two, three.
Okay.
1, 2, 3. And right under education is economics, right?
Okay.
So that's how we order our lives every single day. Now, what does that mean? That means when I email my teachers, my students' teachers, I ended with partners. We remain partners in the education of our greatest asset.
Okay.
And then I sign our name. Now, that means a lot, right? Because that says that if we're partnering, that means that there's 50% I got to do, and there's 50% you got to do, right? So, what does that mean? What does that partnership mean? Well, there's no way that mother should have found out that her son had a 0.13 GPA when it came time for graduation.
Okay.
That should have come up in a parent-teacher conference, not just 12th grade, not just 11th grade, not just in 10th grade, but in 9th grade, all right? But even before that, it's up to the parents to check in on their kids. Listen, my father was our Cub Scout leader, right? Every event that we had at school, he was there.
All right.
My father was, after my mother passed away of cancer, my father was the PTA president for my little sister's elementary school. I became the PTA vice president of my kids' elementary school. I also was on the board of their day school or preschool along with my wife, right?
Right.
And then from there, every single day, I would go and walk my kids to their class in elementary school, give them a hug, greet their teachers, find out if there's anything, and we would pick them up and not just pick them up, but also volunteer after school activities and the like. I know every parent don't have the luxury to do that, but there's got to be one day that parents can volunteer at their kids' school 1 hour out of the year, right? That's being engaged. We check on our kids' homework every single day. We see if they need assistance with it. And you already know, because we talk offline, we got one kid going to college, and every day we're looking at scholarships. We're looking at applications.
Right.
So it's about being involved and exposing your kids to opportunities. So for me, for this situation, yes, the schools need help. They need revamping. But schools and teachers can only work with the product that they're given. So it's for me, I look at the parents as being the greater element of fault for this particular situation.
All right. So I gave you got a clear 6 minutes to basically put forth the classic class argument that we hear from people in different social classes who may be coming from a background where they've got more support, got more resources, talking about what someone from a different situation, dynamic in their family should be doing. And if they can't uphold to that, so now it's the victim's fault. And I think clearly, yes, parents are responsible. And they are the first teachers and are responsible. But you just outlined a situation where for your personal background, you have those things in place. Your children have those things in place as far as parents who understand education, who have put it at the top of the totem pole, and who have the resources to stay on top of their children. What happens when you are a child who does not come from that kind of family background of no fault of your own, right? And you are a parent who, like in this case, got 3 jobs, she says, single parent, trying to make ends meet. She can't possibly be as attentive in the schools, as active as you've been able to do when you're working with a partner, your wife is your partner, and you also have the resources and not working 3 jobs to be able to do that. So to me, there's 3 legs of the education stool. There's the school, there's the parent, there's the child. How can we possibly justify a school that's passing a kid along, knowing that they're failing, and not reaching out adequately to the parent to let the parent know what's going on? And in this case, that's really what you have. You had this school passing a kid along, right? Moving them along. They're clearly showing that they got failing grades in I think in Spanish 1, and they moved the kid up to Spanish 2.
Right.
So you got a parent who's not coming from the kind of background that you're coming from, where they understand education, they understand these dynamics, and a certain level of ignorance, not out of being not intelligent, but ignorance not out of just not knowing, not being sophisticated and understanding the system. It's incumbent on the school to do its part to make sure that they are informing the parent, that they are doing their right by the child.
Right.
And then in this case, the school absolutely failed at that. Now, to your point about the parent, yes, there's 3 legs of the education stool. So the kid has a role too, and the parent absolutely has a role. But
actually, Will, I would say 4 legs. So we talk about the school, we talk about the parents, we talk about the student, but then there's that extracurricular, right? Because we know that in order to develop the whole student, you got to have that extracurricular. So if you don't have the music, the sports, the arts, and things like that in the schools to help to develop the full kid,
right,
then the kid really isn't developed.
Right. So if you're a parent that doesn't have those kinds of resources, you can't necessarily engage them in that 4th leg of the stool. And then so now it's the schools. Are the schools providing that 4th leg? But in this case, again, when you come from a background like I did as well, 2 parents in the home for the most part, parents split. I was 12, but my father was never not around. He was still very much in my life. They put a huge emphasis on education, and they were the parents who would go to the parent-teacher conference. But if you are a child who does not come from that background, Now, what do we say? We just say, well, it's the parents' fault and that's it. The
No.
school has got to do its part. And absolutely, we put too much on our educators, too much on our teachers to be able to do certain things. But if they're handling their end of the bargain,
right,
then I'm comfortable saying, well, the parent failed here. But in these cases, the schools are not handling their end of the stool. And
Will, I'm going to go back a little bit on you because the parent knew that the kid was failing because the kid brings home progress reports and an end of the year report card. Now, most school systems, to get the parents to make sure that they have due notice, they have to sign the progress report, sign the report card, and send it back to school.
But the school said your son got this grade in Spanish 1, but next year we're moving him to Spanish 2. Again, to a parent that's not sufficient, that sounds to me like, okay, he's moving along. He didn't do that well, but he's moving along.
But right, to your point that there is issues with keeping funding to those schools, and there's pressure. As a matter of fact, in that same article, there's another article embedded, attached about the investigation into the Baltimore schools about the grade change in culture, right? Over 8,000 emails from teachers, administrators about the pressure to change grades and to pass students, right? We saw that happen in Atlanta. Of course, it happens in a lot of other places and the like that don't get, the notoriety or the negative press that all this is getting. So we do know that happens. But again, I go back to the teachers. I go back to the parents because I remember there was one teacher that they were pushing to get into the schools because, again, there's a deficit in teachers, especially certified teachers in certain schools. And this particular one teacher wasn't certified yet in that particular subject. Well, we addressed that with the principal. We addressed it with and also worked with that particular teacher to ensure that they were doing the proper things with our child and really with the rest of that particular class for that one course. But that's the only course that I've known in my children's education, who both went to private day school, right, through the Episcopal school system, and also to public school when they went from elementary all the way up to high school. And again, we did the investigation on the school systems, the private schools, and what we felt were best for our children. And of course, they had a voice in it as well. But again, education is the key that unlocks the door to every single opportunity in life. People come here from all across the world just to get a piece of this education. You got people who come here who can't speak English, go to public school, and become successful. So where is that? Again, where's that focus? Where's that?
I think you're missing it. I think you're missing it. If you've got a parent who is not functional in that area, do you blame the parent for not being functional in that area? Or do you do and take extra steps to make sure that parent is aware of what's going on? You mentioned people coming from other countries. A language barrier oftentimes is the case. Oftentimes is a lack of sophistication with understanding the system. So it's incumbent on the school to say, okay, I'm dealing with a parent that's not as sophisticated as ClaVille. So I need to make sure that this parent understands what is going on with their child, not just throw my hands up and just go and change grades and just pass them along, because the parent that's not sophisticated is sitting there assuming that everything is okay. And again, we have a tendency in this society to look down on people who don't have a certain level of sophistication. We do it in a way by just saying, well, you still should know better. I mean, how do I know better if I haven't been exposed and I don't already know better? So the school has got to make some extra efforts and put some extra processes in place. And in this case, this particular school, these public schools do have those processes in place.
Yeah.
And what they failed to do was to actually execute on those processes.
I'm not blaming the parents.
No, you said 100%. You said the 100% responsibility is on the response. Right. There you go. So how is that not blaming?
Listen, again, responsibility and blaming, I look at it as two different things, right?
Okay.
So if I have the responsibility to ensure that my child, when he goes to school, when those two boys go to school, that they are prepared, not just mentally, they're prepared physically,
Right.
With a hot meal, the enthusiasm that they have, the backpack, all that stuff. All right, that's my responsibility, right? If I fail in that area, okay, then it's not the teacher's fault. And I can't then shift that responsibility and then blame the teacher for not educating my child properly when I know I haven't given them a good product. Listen, I see our children, all of our children, not my children, not just your children, but all of our children, especially our Black children, as being seeds of great potential, right? And just I'm talking, those that have a green thumb, horticulture. So if you have a seed, you have to create the soil, the surrounding for that seed. You have to create the opportunity for them to get the proper sunlight, the proper watering. You got to cultivate it. You got to cultivate it. So if I give you a seed and then you put water on it, but then you put soil around it, but I don't put any water for 4 years, and you keep dumping soil on it, I don't give it sunlight, but you keep putting soil on it, which is your responsibility to do, then if I don't get a sprout in 4 years, whose responsibility is that?
But to use your analogy, if you don't have the seed and the soil and the water,
we all got to
around we're talking about around the family structure. Again, you're talking about coming from a perspective of having a family structure that is in place that can provide that kind of educational nurturing and discipline. If you're not
change the family structure,
then that's exactly what I'm saying. That the school is incumbent on looking at what is the family structure that this young kid is coming from. What is the additional need, the additional step, and that we need to have in place to be able to help this parent to understand what they need to do. And that's what the school is absolutely failed on, because these schools have those kinds of protocols in place. Here's another thing. Again, I've been a parent, as you well know, and raised kids. Guess what? Your kids lie. Your kids lie. Kids lie. Kids have all kinds of other motives for which they are going to school and may be thinking about academics, may not be thinking about academics. As academically inclined because of the discipline that you and your wife have done to your kids, guess what? If he had not come to the planet, if your children had not come to this planet with a sense of education, with a sense of wanting to do for self, it in some level, it wouldn't matter what you and your wife did to be able to, because you can't predict how the child is going to, that's that other leg in the stool that I talked about. So here it sounds to me like you had a perfect storm of a kid who was not that serious about school, a parent who is struggling 3 jobs, trying to make ends meet. Let's forget about her personal decisions and how she's responsible for her personal decision. Yes, she's responsible for how she got to where she is. But the fact is, that's where she is. So she needs a school system that's going to be able to help her and help her son and do its part that could actually create an intervention. The school system absolutely, positively failed here. Now, again, the kid has a role. The child has got to be serious about their own education and their own growing. A lot of that nurturing comes from what did they come here with to the planet with, and also what is their environment. So it's nature and it's nurture, right? It's DNA and it's nurture. But the parent has got a role. The parent has got to be engaged in their education and doing their part and doing all that they can do. The school absolutely failed it.
Listen, I agree with you 100% of what you just said.
No, you said 100% is the parents' fault.
No.
You gave the school a pass.
No, as far as nature and nurture and how the school failed in their part, and then you mentioned, let's not look at the parent and how she got to that, the decision she made in her life to get to that point.
Because that's the underlying statement. The underlying statement of is the parents' fault is You made your bed and then so you lying.
No,
That's the underlying statement.
Listen. You misinterpret what I'm saying, and that's why that's why at the beginning of the show when I made my statement, I said, "Let me quantify this statement so you can listen to what I'm saying." Right? This is about a partnership. It's not about shifting blame. It's about understanding your responsibility and creating an environment to where you can live up to your responsibility. Case in point. So again, if you take the premise is education is the key that unlocks every opportunity in life, good opportunity, right? We both know. We both are doctorates. We both went to undergrad. We both worked in professions that you can't work in unless you have these degrees.
Came out of families that valued education. Came out of families. And I still had to do it. And I still had to execute. I still had to execute.
That's
not
right.
my daddy, not my mama. I had to execute.
Absolutely.
That's right.
And neither of us were born with a silver spoon in our mouth.
Absolutely.
Ms. Hawkins. All right. So I'm giving a shout out to one of the great movie scenes out there, right? So those that understand that. But we weren't born with a silver spoon in our mouth, right? But we had parents that understood and environments, right? So the church that I attended, right, that I went to, Bryan Temple Church of God in Christ, education, not just only salvation was pushed and living a holy life, but education was pushed as well. Because we had people in our church. The first PhD I met was in my church. And we're talking about the 70s and early 80s, right? Which was unheard of a lot in a lot of Southern circles, right?
Right.
The first, being around my family members, my uncle was a lawyer, retired judge. My best friend's dad was a judge, currently one of the chief justices on the Court of Appeals for the United States circuits here. So I had a circle of doctors,
amen,
educators, and so forth,
amen,
and teachers in our church and so forth. So education was pushed. Now, when we went off to college, we would have this academic recognition program every year, right? So if you're not standing up there with at least a 3.0, we know you ain't making, you looking bad. You make your parents look bad, right? Because we up there with trophies, 3.0, 3.5, 4.0, top graduate. And then on top of that, when we went to college, we got a plaque, we got a Bible, we got a tie, and we got $25. Right. The idea of that was we're going to recognize you, give you flowers where you live for your achievement. Secondly, we want you to take the Lord with you everywhere you go. That's the snippet of the Bible. 3, the tie represented the job that you're dressing for, right, not the one that you have. And the $25, back in the day, it got you a little bit, but right now, brother, it don't even buy you a book, right? But I don't think they passed at $25 yet. But my point is, what I did, I instituted that program in my church when I became of age. So to this day, my kids have trophies on their bookshelf, other kids and so forth. We taught in Sunday school, have that. My point that I'm making is that if you understand the premise, then you will order your life around the greatest asset that you have. My goal is to ensure, Will, that I produce a product that is a asset to society and not a problem on society, right? Someone who is productive in giving as opposed to someone who's not and then taking away. So it's really a mindset that we have to change in our communities. And anyone who's in this situation that we see that this parent is in, and not just this parent, but other parents. Because keep in mind, if this young man was number 62 out of 120 with a 0.13, that means every number 63 on down to 120 had either that or less.
Right. So I'm glad that you're bringing this up. I'm glad that you mentioned the church because you're actually falling into supporting my point, which is the community failed this child as well. We have a tendency. Listen again. You just named all of the different elements of support that you had from the village
that my parents put me around.
Okay, but
parents had to make the decision to be a part of that church.
And your parents came from an orientation where they were able and equipped to make that decision. So are you saying that people who don't come from an orientation that are as equipped to make that decision then we should turn around and say, well, it's your fault because you're not equipped and you have not made that decision. What I'm saying is you can't.
It's their responsibility. They didn't live up to responsibility. And keep in mind.
Okay, but if you're not equipped, some people, for example, come out of the foster care system and then they just age out.
Yeah.
And a lot of the kinds of nurturing and understanding and nuance of they never got. So now they end up in a situation where they got 3 kids. And again, forgive me, not the impression. I don't know if this is the background of this particular mother with this particular child. So I'm not specifically talking about her. I'm just saying that a lot of people come into adulthood and to family situations without having the kind of structure and background and understanding of nuance and things and responsibilities. So if they don't have that, they didn't come from that, it doesn't seem to me from a Christian standpoint or even from a humanity standpoint to turn around and say, well, it was your responsibility to do X, Y, and Z for your kid and you failed. It's like if you don't know, you don't know. So now you need the rest of the other elements of society, the other pieces of the stool, to be able to intervene and help you to understand what you need to be doing. And if that is done and then you resisting that, now I'll be the first one to say, okay, you've gotten these services, you got this intervention, you got this help, and you still resisting it and you're not doing anything, then that's your fault.
But I'm not letting these parents off the hook, because at some point between quote unquote graduation, which they won't be doing, and going and getting into high school, that's 4 years. And at some point within those 4 years, you receive due notice that your child was not performing, right?
That's not what, in this particular case we're talking about. This parent was getting information that they was being moved on. The kid was being moved on. That's why we got an investigation.
She received a report card.
But that her son was moved to the next level.
But on the report, it may have said promoted to the next level, but he only passed 3 classes in 4 years. So that means that he failed at least 1 year. He failed all his classes, right?
But she's not that sophisticated parent that you are. It means she was told a kid was moved on.
If my kid has all D minuses and Fs, there's a problem there.
And they still getting moved on to the next grade.
But
that means they should be able to graduate with a D grade.
But don't you want better? Anybody wants better for their kids, because hey, I would like my kid to have an A, right? So again, I'm not letting the parents off the hook from their responsibility. I'm not blaming them. I'm not letting them off the hook for their responsibility. And let me go back to my example, how I grew up. Neither my father or mother went to college. My father went to the military. My mother had an opportunity to go to college, but circumstances afforded where she could not go. My father wasn't, quote unquote, the best high school student, but he was very smart, right? Mm-hmm. So, and then to combine, my parents are 2 kids of total, in their 2 families, total of 20 kids, right? My mother's one of 11, my father's one of 9, right? So with all of that, and if you look at our educational background, I have Harvard graduates in my family. I have valedictorians of prominent universities, the first African-American valedictorians in our family, and this happened not because of, quote unquote, the disadvantages that we had growing up, but it happened because we understood to get out of that situation, there were advantages and opportunities that were there. Now, I will say this, and we've talked about it on our show before, the Black church is a phenomenal stone in our society to help push upward mobility, both spiritual, economic, social, and the like. I think that's missing in a lot of our communities as well, people being attached to our churches and our churches taking that next level. Because in church, in your community, that's where you're going to find a diversity of people. Like I said, I had teachers.
But ClaVille, you essentially just said that because your background is such that your parents didn't come from a lot of education. Just like my father didn't go beyond 8th grade. My mother didn't go beyond high school. They both thought education was very important, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So but I can't say that because my parents did that and valued and came into a life experience where they understood the value of education, that therefore everybody else should have that experience. Other people have had experience when they were in school and they were actually attacked while they were in school and undermined and had their intellectual capacity undermined in school. So they came out of school devaluing education, not having a value, an appreciation for education. Now they bring a child into that environment. So what I'm saying is that at some point, we can't just point at people and say, because you don't have this understanding of the situation, it's your fault. Well, there's a reason to how I got to this point where I don't have an understanding of the situation. And that's where intervention comes in. That's where the school comes in by doing its part and saying, look, you need to wake up. And if we're doing all of our part, and here's what you need to do, and here's what your child needs. And if the parent at that point is rejecting what the school is saying, now I'm like, what's wrong with you? It's the parents' fault. But in this case, and in many of these cases in these cities, what we have is a breakdown of the school not taking that extra step and not following its own protocols to get the parents to be aware, and therefore the children are failing as well.
So Will, look, to your point, and with that being the situation, I give my surrounding circumstances to let you know that, again, they weren't ideal.
Right.
But what happened was my parents valued education and created the environment to foster the ideal situation to which we're both in now, right? So I can truly say that it was because my parents had the mentality and also created environments around.
And the intervention. Somebody intervened. Something intervened that helped them to understand, no, this is important.
And look,
if that intervention never comes, then
right.
what?
And the number one intervention in that, I can truly say it, my father testifies about it all the time, who's an elder. It was him giving his life to God and bringing him into understanding that there is a better life, than what things that are out there, right? So even from serving military to coming in, giving his life to God, and then working and being faithful to God, his family, and of course the job in which only job he had and what he retired out of. Those things help to propel us to see that, you got to stick with it. And we're talking about a time period where, blacks in the South, anytime you try to push up for upper mobility, you talk about being held back. Being pushed back against.
Well, it's still going on now, right? It's still, and especially in Baltimore, in West Baltimore. This is the area where Freddie Gray and all of the uprising that happened. These things are still happening. We still live in a segregated society. So my thing is, let's not blame people unless we've given them the intervention. And if they reject the intervention, I'm ready to give them all the blame that they deserve. But it takes the schools, the parents, and the children to be involved in their education.
Listen, if you were born in the United States of America, you have the internet, you have television, you see the great strides. We talk about Black History Month, everyday Black history being made. I'm not letting you off the hook, right? You understand that if you're in a bad situation, there's an opportunity for a better situation. The key is to seek and find, right? Now, my father used to always say, anytime I made a decision outside of the decision he wanted me to make, he was like, son, you always do what you want to do. And that's the key to society. Every single person, especially in the United States of America, we always do what we want to do. So I'm not letting anybody off the hook at all. If you want a better life, if you want to seek better education, if you want to if you understand that you want to create a better environment around that premise that education is the key to success, you have the opportunity in the United States of America to do it. And you have the responsibility to ensure that whatever seed God gives you the ability to procreate and put on this earth, you have the responsibility, nobody else. You have the responsibility to put them in the position in order to be successful, which means you have to make sacrifices for your life. Now, everything that I talked about, what my father did, what I did as a father for our children, we made sacrifices, man, in order to do that. So there were things that we could have been doing. Like I told my wife, we had money before we had kids. I mean, we were flying here, flying there, weekend in the grill, that type of thing. But
yeah, when the kids come, that's all gone. That all has
exactly,
a way of rising. Yeah,
exactly. If you want to have that situation, we didn't push our kids off on our parents and saying, "Oh, watch my kids." No, these are my children. I'm watching my kids. I'm going to the park with my kids. I'm going to teaching my kids how to swim. I'm on the golf course with my kids. I'm on the tennis court with them. I'm on the basketball court with them.
Well, I certainly agree with all that, because that's the kind of father that I was.
I know.
When I was raising my
it.
kids, and have
Absolutely.
continued to be. But it has also taught me that we can't put our own standards on other people unless we have walked through their life's shoes. So and other people need certain type, everybody needs some kind of intervention. Even in my environment, growing up in public housing, I needed an intervention. I could have easily gone the other direction.
That's right.
Even with my parents' emphasis on education.
Hey,
so I'm just
very
much believe that we get into these socioeconomic class discussions when people who have come from a more secure environments, where they've been exposed to these things, put those kinds of values onto other people who have not been exposed to those things. Now, it's incumbent on us, and it's incumbent on society in general, to make sure folks have an opportunity to understand what their role and responsibility is. And if they reject that, then I will be the first one to say, well, look, this is your fault, because I don't care how dysfunctional your environment is, you are still responsible for your life, and you're responsible for the other lives that you bring into the world. But if we haven't first given people that opportunity, giving them that intervention, like in the case of these schools, having protocols in place to address a kid like this, and to not follow through with your protocols and then turn around and blame the parent, I'm just not ready to do that. But I am ready to say that there's three legs of that stool. The parent has a responsibility, the school has a responsibility, the child absolutely has a responsibility to go in there and execute, because if they don't execute, you can have the loving, secure school and parent all you want. And if the kid is not going to execute, it's not going to happen either.
Absolutely. And look, let's add a fourth leg to that, the community as a whole. And the community involves everything in society that helps to foster, a good citizen, a model citizen. So at the end of the day, if you have them, if God gives you the ability and the great ability to procreate and bring and duplicate that which we are, then you have the sole responsibility to put them in position and in order to succeed.
Right.
When my children were born, my life ended and their lives began, meaning that my selfish desires and goals took a back seat to what they need in order to be successful. And that's the position everybody should be in. So at the end of the day, Will, what do you think we should do as a community?
Oh, I think that we got to be able to be our brothers and sisters keeper. All of the different areas of the village that you mentioned are all important to being able to raise children and have an emphasis on education. Parents absolutely got to be engaged in the schools system and not just send their kid to school and believe that that's it and take their foot off the pedal and believe, because quite frankly, that's happening in the suburbs too. That happens. It doesn't just happen in the inner city. That happens in all kinds of communities where folks just kind of have a cavalier attitude. If I put my kid in a good school, then that's it. The school is supposed to do everything. No, you have a responsibility, as you said. The school has a responsibility, and the student has a responsibility. We all got to live up to our responsibility. So take us on home.
Yeah. So again, a great conversation about, pass or fail. The success of our public school system and where the responsibility lies. So with that being the case, listen, thank you for joining us for this episode of LaVeist and ClaVille. Follow us on our social media, like, share on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Acast. Listen to the podcast. Hats off to our producer, Ben Bailey, for keeping us here right and tight, and also all of the wonderful Black influencers on our social media platforms that he creates and puts out there for us. Go to our social media, check it out. If you have a question, email us at LaVeist and ClaVille at gmail.com. Until next time, that's the way we see it, and that's the way it is. We see you next time.